good evening. First of all, I should say that I've had a slight technical problem, and CJ is kindly going to display my slides for me. We were fiddling around and had a bit of difficulty. So CJ, you want me just when I want to move on, I just say move on. Is that right? Or next slide?
Then there'll be a couple of seconds delay.
Yeah,
so that'll be just before you want to.
That's okay. And if I want to switch off the slides so you can see my ugly features or something, what do I do for that?
I'm not sure. I can turn off the slides at any time.
No, it's okay. I won't be needing to do that for a bit anyway. So
yeah, no, just tell me and I'll turn it off when you need. We can pause it.
Thank you very much.
You once I stop speaking.
Yes. Well, good evening. As I say, most of the activities that we partake in our daily lives carry risk, and certain occupations, for instance, being a policeman or a firefighter, being in the army can carry risks, and it's perhaps not appreciated widely that that paranormal investigation itself may be to some degree hazardous. I heard vaguely about the potential hazards of investigation years ago, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. I didn't really hear of any particular cases that stuck in my mind. But a few years ago, I was reading some of the material that's been put out by Darren Ritson and Michael Hallowell, investigators from the northeast of England. And they investigated a well-known poltergeist case at South Shields in 2006. The activity involved a young couple and a child. The child was a boy and was the son of the female from a previous relationship. And the phenomena affecting them began at the end of 2005, and Mike Hallowell and Darren Ritson became involved in 2006, and it turned out to be a very active case. And in the course of that investigation and others that they've conducted in the Northeast, they sometimes ran into this phenomenon that's been dubbed contagion. First, the next slide, please, CJ. And I'll define contagion rather than giving some sort of abstract, all-encompassing definition. I'll delineate it or define it in what, if you want to be very technical, is called ostensive terms. That means by citing examples rather than giving an abstract definition. And broadly speaking, contagion is where phenomena follow you home from an investigation. If you, what I'm referring to is the investigator, of course. Now, I'm using the word home here in both a sort of literal sense and also a slightly more extended sense. It could be literally your own home that the phenomena occur in after you've been out on a case, or it could be someplace you happen to be staying. Imagine, for instance, that you're based in Kent and you travel up to the Midlands to investigate a case, and you spend a couple of nights in a hotel. After your first night at the hotel, you go out to the case, you maybe witness some phenomena, and then you return to the hotel, and then you find that some disturbing phenomena have sort of seemingly followed you to the hotel. That could be cited as an instance of contagion, assuming, of course, that your hotel room doesn't happen to be independently haunted. Another version of contagion, or a variation of it, is that you return to your family from an investigation, you return to your home, and it's members of your family, not necessarily you, who then experience phenomena that seem to be related in some way to the investigation that you've been involved in. Or you may start to experience more general bad luck, which could entail perhaps health problems. There is a certain moral aspect to this, because if members of your family can suffer from something you're doing, it's something that perhaps one needs to take into account. Although people might question how high the risk is, and I'll be addressing that issue shortly. Next slide, please, CJ. So as I've sort of already mentioned, the contagion phenomena fall broadly into three categories. They're not mutually exclusive. disturbing paranormal phenomena occurring in your home, for instance, after you've been on an investigation, or more generally bad luck and health problems. Of course, I mean, health problems, in a sense, are a type of bad luck, but these are the sort of broad categories of potential or possible contagion manifestations, judging from the literature. Next slide, please, CJ. Now, Darren Ritson, in his most recent book on this topic, which I'd recommend, it's Poltergeist, Parallels and Contagion, published in 2021. He distinguishes between two potential types of, or possible types of contagion, active and passive. The active contagion is where the presumed intelligence behind phenomena at an investigation site deliberately targets the person who experiences the contagion. And passive contagion is a hypothesized situation where the process of contagion could occur a bit like catching a cold. It could occur automatically. It could be an impersonal process rather than something deliberate. Next slide, please, CJ. Now, I'm inclined to think that when contagion occurs, if it occurs, it's probably always or mainly always active rather than passive. But I shan't get bogged down on that. But regarding active contagion, there are three possible motives, if you like, for this that come to mind. One is retribution, another is deterrence, and another is a wish to demonstrate paranormal mastery. Retribution could be a situation where, for instance, it could occur, for instance, if you are investigating a case and the intelligence behind the activity resents your intrusion, resents your involvement, doesn't want you to be there, is really telling you to F off. It may express its anger, its displeasure with your presence by inflicting these phenomena on you, affecting you in your home, affecting your family. So it could be retribution. It could also be by making an example of you, if the investigator, it could be aimed at acting as a more general deterrent to other investigators. So you're not welcome, and neither is your colleague, or we don't want other investigators here, leave us alone. A third possibility, and I think it needs to be considered seriously, is that if contagion phenomena occur, they may be motivated by a wish to demonstrate paranormal mastery. And rather than kind of discuss this in theory, I'll go on to the very next slide, actually, because I'm going to discuss a couple of examples from the South Shields case. And the first one, I think, relates to this notion of paranormal mastery. I'll just consult my notes here. Yes. Now, on the 31st of, let me see, the 31st of August, I think it was, 2006, Hallowell's mobile phone rang just before 2 o'clock in the morning, but the ringing stopped before he managed to retrieve it. The call was supposedly from a friend. Hallowell rang the friend back, but the latter denied having made the call. His mobile phone had been on the dashboard of his car, and he hadn't used it for some hours. However, the call log indicated that his phone had indeed rung Hallowell's mobile phone just before 2 a.m. Later that morning, the friend visited Hallowell, and it came to light that the very time the call was made, the friend had been driving past the home of the family at the center of the South Shields case. While the two men were chatting in Hallowell's garden, the latter's phone rang. That's Hallowell's phone. He retrieved it from the house, by which time a message on the screen referred to a missed call. Again, it was supposedly from his friend, although the latter's mobile phone was switched off. Then Halliwell received a text message mentioning a voicemail message that had been left for him. He entered the retrieval number, and the message was a recording of the conversation that he just had with his friend. So these phenomena are intriguing. They arguably they constitute contagion, because at that time, Halliwell and his colleague Ritson were involved in investigating the South Shields case. These phenomena occurred in Halliwell's own home, and also brought in this friend. And at the time of these incidents, the friend hadn't visited the premises at the center of the South Shields poltergeist case. And if you think about it, these manifestations involve a high degree of technical mastery. For the intelligence behind the phenomena to be able to produce these effects is really some technical feat. And this is what I mean by mastery. And another thing about these incidents, if you think about them, they're not in themselves particularly threatening. I think these phenomena that I'm mentioning with the phone are probably less disturbing than seeing an apparition in your bedroom or having objects flying around in your house. So they're not that threatening, but they do demonstrate this high degree of technical mastery. And this could be an indication that sometimes at least the contagion phenomena are basically paranormal displays intended to show the power of this presumed higher intelligence. Next slide, please, CJ. The second case from the South Shields case I'd like to mention concerns some poltergeist writing. Some writing appeared on a board in the home of the people at the center of the case. And I think it was photographs were sent of this writing was sent by Halliwell and Ritson to a graphologist who was based in London. And as she looked over the pictures of the writing in her garden in London, she suddenly sensed a presence behind her, that of a tall man in a long dark coat. And her description matched that given by a young child at the house in the South Shields case. And the boy had repeatedly seen such a figure repeatedly. And the graphologist was reportedly quite disturbed by this experience. So this could be seen as contagion. It could see that it's spreading out from the case, and now this graphologist, who is only peripherally involved in the case, is now being subjected to phenomena. However, it's worth considering an alternative possible explanation, perhaps not very plausible, but a possible explanation is that somehow the graphologist forged a telepathic link with the boy involved in the case. And her experience of this figure was tapping into the boy's experience in some way via telepathy. Next slide, please, CJ. Next case can be found on ASSAP's website. It's a case that was reported in Anomaly in 1991 by someone called Colin Davis. And it concerned a shop in, I think it was in York. He describes it as the case as a Yorkshire poltergeist case, but when you read carefully the article, it does seem that the shop concerned, the bed shop where the poltergeist phenomena occurred, was in the city of York itself. Davis was in touch with the shop and visited the premises and reportedly experienced phenomena during his very first visit. He was living at the time in Essex, in Colchester in Essex, and during a week when he was at home, he received over 80 phone calls, mysterious phone calls. Let me just see what it says here. Yeah. Over 70 strange calls. Sometimes he would hear electronic bleeps, or sometimes there was just silence. On occasions, his answer phone recorded Don, that's the pseudonymous name of the proprietor of the bed shop, saying, "Hello, the bed shop, can I help you?" The reference to an answer phone suggests to me that Davis's phone was a landline. When Davis spoke to Don about this matter, the latter reported that his phone had rung and he had responded, but no one had answered, or that he'd heard Davis's answer phone playing its message. Now, again, this could be construed as a case of contagion. It could be seen that Davis was involved in investigating this poltergeist case in York, and then he was sort of the phenomena spread out to involve him. However, I think it's also worth considering the possibility that these manifestations regarding his telephone were just part of the normal range of poltergeist activity. What we aren't told, I think, in the article is whether anyone else was showered by phone calls. And it could be that if you think about it, that maybe the numbers of both parties were stored on their respective phones. And if you had poltergeist activity, whatever was behind the phenomena was capable of ringing phones and making calls and so on. And it didn't necessarily mean that Davis had been singled out in some special way for attention. I'll come on to cases shortly that are more clear cut. Next slide, please, CJ. This is a case concerning the village of Mccue in central Scotland. It's about 14 miles west of Stirling. And Malcolm Robinson, who'd started a group years ago called Strange Phenomena Investigations, which took an interest in poltergeist, hauntings, and also UFO phenomena. They were contacted by the occupants of a cottage in Mccue, and they experienced some ghostly phenomena over a short period between late September and the 15th of November, 1994. And Robinson went out with another couple of investigators from the group, visited the couple. The phenomena at the cottage had occurred shortly after they'd had some renovation work carried out. And as you're probably aware, ghostly phenomena do sometimes seem to be precipitated by renovations or building renovations. Anyway, arriving home after that visit, it was late at night, early hours of the morning, in fact. Robinson was sitting in a chair, his favorite chair at home, flicking idly through a newspaper. He was, by his own admission, tired at the time. And then he heard between 4 and 6 very loud rapping sounds in quick succession. They seemed to come from directly behind his head. There was no adjoining house in that direction, and he went outside and looked around, but no one else seemed to be about. And Robinson was inclined to think that this was a contagion manifestation. He somehow brought something back from the investigation. Again, I think we've got to consider possible alternative explanations. And in this case, I think one has to sort of take into account that this was late at night, that Robinson at the time was tired, and one can experience hallucinations on the edge of sleep, either when you're about to fall asleep, which would be called a hypnagogic hallucination, or when you're emerging from sleep, which would be called a hypnopompic hallucination. I personally experienced occasional hypnopompic auditory phenomena when I'm sort of in the process of waking up. I might hear a sound like an electronic bleep, a bit like the first ring of a phone. Because I'm used to it, I know it's subjective. I don't believe it's a real outside noise. So it's probably, in my case, it would be more technically and correctly described as a pseudo hallucination rather than a true hallucination. The difference being that, if you want to be very technical about this, a true hallucination is one where the person experiencing the sensory effect believes it's objectively real. So it's an open question whether what Robinson experienced was paranormal or whether it was a normal phenomenon. Next slide, please, CJ. Oh, so that's just a quick view of Mccue. If you're driving west, if you're coming into the village from the eastern side, that's what you see. It doesn't really add much to what I've already told you. Next slide, please. I now want to turn to the Skinwalker Ranch case, which many of you will have heard about. Because there have been reports of quite a bit of contagion occurring in connection with this case. In case you don't know much about it, I'll very, very briefly give you an outline of for the background of the case, but I'll be very synoptic, very brief. I think we can break the story of this ranch into different time periods, and I'll start with before or up to 1994. Now, the trouble with this period is that the ownership details and the paranormal history of the ranch during the period prior to 1994 are disputed. In 2005, a well-known book called Hunt for the Skinwalker appeared, and it was written by Colm Kelleher, who was involved in an investigative team, and the journalist George Knapp. And this was the first book on the case of the Skinwalker Ranch. And some of the details in it have been challenged. The late Frank Salisbury, whom I was in touch with a few years ago, prior to his death, of course, looked into the case and included a chapter on it in a revised version of a book that he'd written. So because that period is the details are disputed, I shan't go into the detail, except to say that for many years, the ranch was occupied by a couple called Kenneth and Edith Myers. And there is dispute as to precisely when they acquired the property, for how long the property was empty before the next owners, so the next occupants moved in, whether or not the Myers experienced any phenomena. So this is disputed, so I'll just move on to 1994 to 6. Now, during this period, the ranch was owned by the Sherman family. That's their real name. And it's if you look at the Hunt for the Skinwalker, they're given a pseudonymous name, but actually their name was already in the public domain before that book was published. So pseudonymizing the name was a bit unnecessary. Now, allegedly, during their occupancy, which was less than 2 years, there were wide-ranging phenomena: poltergeist, haunt-type incidents, UFO sightings, cattle mutilations, sightings of unusual creatures, a whole range of things, allegedly. And they sold the ranch in August 1996, to Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow is a billionaire businessman from Las Vegas, who made his money in the property field, and he ventured into the aerospace field as well. Bigelow has an interest in anomalous phenomena, and from 1995, he started funding an organization, a private scientific investigative organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And after he acquired the ranch, NIDS personnel spent a lot of time at the ranch, and they hired the former owner, Terry Sherman, to act as the ranch manager. So if NIDS personnel weren't at the ranch and something happened, he could contact NIDS and they could arrive in Utah, where the ranch is based, very quickly, because they had access to a jet aircraft, and they could be there quickly. I don't think, if I'm correct here, that Sherman was actually living at the ranch. I think it was probably a sort of a day job. I think he'd probably had enough living at the ranch from his previous experiences. Anyway, when Bigelow's took over, NIDS personnel did experience some phenomena, but they were disappointed they weren't able to record a great deal with equipment. Eventually, after a sort of spike, the phenomena sort of petered out. I think they petered out by about 2002. However, the ranch continued to be owned by Robert Bigelow and until 2016. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what a project that the Bigelow was involved in. Yes. in a book by Lukatsky, Kelleher, Knapp, which a book published in 2001, it's explained that Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, that's an organization obviously that Bigelow was involved in, was awarded a $22 million contract by the United States government in 2008. On the government side, the contract was managed by the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the program established by BASS, or Bigelow's organization, was known as the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or ASSAP. These acronyms can become a bit sort of tiresome, but ASSAP, I'll say that, I'll use that in future to save time. And basically, ASSAP was looking at a really, I suppose you could say, anomalous phenomena. And some of their work was focused on the ranch, which, as I say, Bigelow was still in ownership of. Kelleher, who'd previously been involved with NIDS, was hired by BASS and became the deputy administrator, second to Bigelow himself, who was the CEO. Kelleher, I can't remember whether I mentioned, I think he's an Irishman. His background is in biochemistry. And as I say, he was involved in the previous NIDS investigation, and he became involved in ASSAP. Now, during the time that ASSAP was running, which was for a little over 2 years, until December 2010, there was quite a lot of contagion reported. Unfortunately, the book by Lukatsky, Kelleher, and Knapp uses it says at the beginning that they've used pseudonyms for some of the names, but they don't specify where they're using pseudonyms. But I think we can guess, with all the important people mentioned, that most of them, they're probably pseudonymous. The book mentions a Jonathan Axelrod, and as I say, that's almost certainly a pseudonym, a senior aerospace engineer who visited the ranch in July 2009 and made subsequent visits. And that appeared to unleash contagion on his wife and children. For more than 12 years, they reportedly experienced bizarre phenomena, such as footsteps, sightings of various colored orbs. There were sightings of dogmen or wolf-type creatures. Strangely, it seems, if I've understood the book correctly, that Axelrod himself didn't experience these phenomena. It was his wife and his two sons who were experiencing these phenomena. It's analogous, I suppose, to someone maybe having the COVID-19 virus, but being immune to it, in a sense, not having symptoms, but still being an infectious agent. And so if you've got COVID-19, you're carrying the virus, even though you're not displaying symptoms or signs, you can still infect other people. And that seemed to be the situation with Axelrod. Interestingly, the phenomena kind of rippled out beyond the immediate family. A couple of contacts of one of the sons reported phenomena without prompting, which was of the same nature that the Axelrod family had experienced. So this could be seen as a sort of a next stage of contagion. Axelrod seems to have been a fairly sanguine sort of person, a kind of, he was obviously disturbed, I think, that these things were happening to his family, but he wasn't terribly upset by it, as far as I can gather. Another person who had quite dramatic experiences of contagion, allegedly, was a woman referred to in the book as Juliet Whitt. And she was a Pentagon analyst. I think she also worked with the Department of Defense, which may be the same thing, really. She visited the ranch, and along with, and one night she was walking on the ranch with Com Kelleher, and everything sort of went quiet around them, a sort of sense of derealization, I suppose you could call it, or what Jenny Randles calls the Oz factor, although I don't like that expression. that happened, and then they saw an entity, a creature that seemed to be a cross between a small dinosaur and a beaver. They only saw it briefly. Now, it seems that Juliet Witt was upset by this, or was shaken by it, because that night she insisted on having a security man, I think, in the adjacent room where she was sleeping, and wanted a light to be left on in that room. So I think if I hope I've got those details right, but she was obviously a bit sort of shaken up by this. And when she got home, it turned out that she was reporting that disturbing experiences. She was sharing her home. The home was in Virginia with what the book calls a roommate, but I suspect that just means a housemate, not necessarily someone sharing literally the same room. It may have been a lodger rather than a boyfriend. And he woke up at some point seeing a figure standing over his bed. Poltergeist phenomena occurred in the house, and Witt's car was attacked by a gigantic bird. And it seems that this activity was still occurring there several years, at least, after her visit. In fact, the book at one point says that I think it says that the phenomena was still occurring. This was presumably just before the book went to print. So it could be that that these phenomena affecting Juliet Witt are still occurring. And going back to this chap Axelrod, phenomena were apparently continuing, as I said, for 12 years, which again, in terms of when the book was written, it could be, I suppose, that his family are still affected by these phenomena. I think in the case of Witt, the housemate moved out. It was too traumatized to stay. And I think the phenomena affecting Witt did diminish a bit, but were still continuing, I say, for a long time, not just a matter of a couple of days or a few weeks or something, but years. Other people to experience phenomena were Kelleher and Dr. Davis. This was during the NIDS period, going back to the earlier time during the investigation, when they were doing investigations on the ranch at night, going for night watches and so on. Their wives would occasionally report waking up and seeing figures in the room, or shadowy figures in their homes. Another couple who allegedly experienced contagion were Robert Bigelow and his wife, according to an interview that Bigelow gave in early 2021. George Knapp, the journalist, one of the co-authors of the book I've mentioned, he spent some time at the ranch, and the writing is a bit ambiguous, but it seems that his wife experienced some phenomena. And it may be that these phenomena occurred when he was away at the ranch or when he got back. I'm not quite sure about that. So it does seem that quite a lot of contagion was occurring at the ranch. And also reportedly, there were family members of people who were infected by contagion or affected or seemingly affected, succumbed to autoimmune diseases. Could you move on a slide, actually, CJ? I think next slide, thanks. Yeah, I've already done that one, so next one. Next one. Yeah. Yeah, that's where I want to be. Yes. So according to Lakatsky et al., family members have been diagnosed with autoimmune diseases. In case you don't know, autoimmune diseases are diseases where the body's immune system seems to attack the body, the healthy body. It's as if the immune system is mistaking one's own healthy tissue as something invading and that needs to be fought off. The problem with this, there is a little qualification on page 82 of the book, although it talks about many people, the book talks about many people being diagnosed with this autoimmune diseases, it does say on page 82 that there aren't enough data to be sure that there's a causal relationship there. So there's a bit of equivocation there. So maybe we shouldn't take too much of that, except that alerted by this report, whether it's correct or not, perhaps in looking at contagion cases elsewhere, or if we run into them ourselves, we should look out for that. It's something that to bear in mind. If contagion happens to you after an investigation, be interested to know whether one of your family then develops one of these diseases. Next slide, please, CJ. This is in the abstract I sent, which you may have read on the site. I did refer to there are even cases of alleged deaths associated with contagion, and I'll mention a case briefly. I'll try and make it brief. A dramatic case, if it can be believed. In his book Interdimensional Universe, Philip Imbrogno, this was a book published in 2008, describes a series of strange events that began in February 1978, after he received a call from a woman whom he called Sandra, that's a pseudonym. She reported that she, her mother, and her daughter had had many UFO experiences, and that alien-like beings had often walked into their home through the walls via a rotating black hole and had taken them away somewhere that they couldn't remember. And that had been going on, it appeared, since Sandra's mother was 9 years old. And Sandra recalled having gone through the black hole herself at times when she was a child. She explained that these intrusions had stopped for many years, but had then started up again, with her daughter being the focus of attention. Now, Imbrogno claims that he visited Sandra's home with some fellow investigators, and that they witnessed an unusual event outside the house involving a globe of yellow light, about 6 inches in diameter, which moved across the front lawn, some 10 feet above the ground. When Imbrogno got within 20 feet of it, a tingling sensation went up and down his neck. Then, after stopping in midair, as if to observe him, the light shot straight up into the sky. The following month, Imbrogno returned accompanied by a psychologist called Dr. Merger, who had a background in hypnotic regression. And under hypnosis, Sandra recalled experiences of the UFO entity encounter type. Her daughter was ill with the flu at the time and was sleeping in her bedroom. However, just after Sandra came out of hypnosis, her daughter started screaming and jumped out of bed. She claimed that the man from the hole had come and had said that he was going to take her. Asked what else he'd said, the daughter pointed at Imbrogno and explained, the man said that he would get him and his friends if they don't leave us alone. So a sort of direct threat, if you like. Imbrogno had tape recorded the hypnosis session, and when he and other team members listened to the recording, they heard strange noises throughout most of it. But at one point, a very audible voice said, "Stop playing with my head. They pointed you out to us, and we know where and how to get you all." Imbrogno took the tape to a friend who did audio recordings for a university. When it was played backwards, a voice could be heard. It claimed to be that of an entity from a place that is parallel with our world. And among other things, it said, if you continue to interfere with our work, we will have no choice but to take action against you. Shortly after that, a fellow team member told Imbrogno that he was hearing voices. And the next day, he reported that entities had appeared in his bedroom. Not long after, Imbrogno heard that this colleague had been killed by jumping in front of a train. Another team member, Frank, left the group after being visited by someone claiming to be from the National Security Agency, and who reportedly told Frank that he would lose his commercial pilot's license if he continued with UFO investigations. A third team member, Carl, told Imbrogno about a dream or vision that he'd had the night before, in which he'd woken to see a tall hooded figure that stretched out a hand on which there was a beating heart. The entity reportedly said, "This could be your heart," and then squeezed the organ, bursting it. Carl then awoke in a cold sweat. He subsequently died from heart failure, after an operation to correct a recently discovered valve defect. Apart from Imbrogno, that left just 2 team members. One of them, a police officer, dropped out of UFO research after he and his wife had a number of sightings that terrified them both. The other, an engineer, continued for a year or so, keeping mainly to himself. In 1979 or 1980, he told Imbrogno that he was giving up UFO research. Imbrogno notes that the colleague was beginning to live his life in fear because of many bizarre things that had seemingly happened to him. Imbrogno mentions the occupations of his fellow team members, but not their names. Accordingly, they're effectively anonymous. If the story is uncorroborated, it might well strain people's credulity because UFO investigators don't normally experience such dramatic events. I did sound out a couple of US-based UFO researchers whether they knew about this case and knew of any corroboration, but neither did. Another problem with the case is that in 2011, a UFO skeptic called Lance Moody had some suspicions about Imbrogno's supposed qualifications, academic qualifications, and he contacted the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is one of the more prestigious universities in the States, from which Imbrogno supposedly had higher degrees, I think a master's and a PhD. And the establishment had no record of Imbrogno, and his military service claims about his military service credentials have also been challenged as well. And you can read about this in this article I've referenced by Kenneth Randall. You can get it on the web. The problem with this is, I mean, leaving aside the question of whether these allegations about Imbrogno are true or not, even if it is the case that he did, exaggerate his credentials, if you like, it's difficult to know whether that necessarily invalidates, a report that he's made about a case investigation. I suppose if we're honest, nearly everyone has told a lie at some point in their lives, and one could say that, well, some lies are more significant than others, and if you're lying to boost your credentials as a UFO investigator, therefore it casts more doubt on your activities, your reports, than if it's an innocent lie. You're saying to someone, "Do you like my hat?" and you say yes because you don't want to cause offence. So I don't know. It's not logically necessary to say that if Imbrogno did misrepresent his background, that the case isn't valid. However, perhaps more seriously, in necessitating caution, is the fact that, as far as I'm aware, this sort of dramatic report hasn't. I haven't seen any independent corroboration of it. Next slide, please, CJ. Now, I was, as I say, when I became interested in this phenomenon of contagion, my impression was, because I hadn't heard about it much, I assumed that it's probably not that common in terms of how many investigators experience it. So I contacted by email or Facebook Messenger 32, or tried to contact 32 people who are or have been involved in investigation. 18 responded, and a large majority indicated that they hadn't personally experienced contagion. I'll just quote some of their responses, actually, just 2 or 3 of them, which are of interest. Malcolm Robinson, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Yes, following some of the comments. One of them was Bill Eyre, who's watching tonight. Bill kindly responded to my survey, and he noted that over the years I have visited premises associated with haunting type activity on about 60 occasions. I never experienced contagion, and none of my fellow investigators experienced it. I guess this effect only occurs occasionally. Another one who kindly responded was Steve Parsons, who's well known to ASSAP and the SPR and has been involved in many investigations over the years. And he wrote, fortunately, despite almost 50 years of visiting haunted sites, including some of the more notable ones, I have never had anything untoward happen following a visit that would lead me to think that I had been so affected. It may also be worth mentioning that I have acquired a large collection of supposedly haunted objects and memorabilia, several of which were passed to me as a result of others' experiences, which they blamed on the object. Once again, absolutely nothing of note has ever happened as a result of these objects sitting around the office. Another person who kindly responded, was Peter Robbins, who has a background in UAP research. And he said that during the many years that I have been involved in investigating and researching the UAP phenomenon, I have certainly experienced stress, never for any mysterious reason, but I cannot say that I have experienced contagion as you describe it. At least two of the respondents asked acquaintances of theirs whether they had experienced contagion, but so far as I know, where there was a response, no one said yes. Now, respondents who said that they had or might have experienced contagion, only 4 of the respondents fell into this category. Malcolm Robinson, whom I've already mentioned, reported only one experience, and that was the one concerning the cottage in Bucclivie, which I've already mentioned. And as I've explained, it's possible it's conceivable that report could be attributed to a hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucination rather than contagion. Another respondent, Nick Kyle, is a former president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research. With a long-standing interest in mediumship and other aspects of the paranormal, he has spiritualist leanings. He mentioned various incidents involving himself and others, and I shall quote him regarding the one that most accords with the concept of paranormal contagion, as I'm using it. However, regarding this case, he made no mention of overtly paranormal phenomena occurring at his home, just a feeling of depression. And if contagion occurred, it was invited. And he wrote, "A few years ago, I was asked to attend a home in Renfrewshire, that's to the west of Glasgow, that was being renovated. Workers reported experiencing interference with their work, including unexplained voices calling, the movement of tools and objects, and a sense of presence and being watched. They soon left the job. The homeowner explained that she had been in this home as a child and had experienced ghostly phenomena at that time. She wondered if the same ghost remained. I sensed there was one, whom I named Eric, although subsequently I was told by the owner that she had called him Patrick as a child. In my awareness, the ghost was enjoying being mischievous and was reluctant to leave. But I felt sorry for the lady of the house who feared for her young child. Therefore, I invited Patrick to accompany me to my home, where he would have more fun, and I had a way to communicate with him. I was aware of him leaving with me to return home, and over 2 weeks I felt depressed. I attributed this to him and his negativity, but I managed to get him to leave. So in this case, as to say, all we have in terms of evidence is really, or a report is a feeling of depression, no sort of objective or clear-cut paranormal phenomena. C.J. Romer, who is of course our chairman, he mentioned the following experience. However, as he states, it may be explicable in prosaic terms. I had a number of bizarre experiences over the years, but none ever seemed to come home with me except maybe once. In the late 1990s, I performed a typical ghost vigil at the Dick Whittington pub in Westgate, Gloucester. The vigil had to be cut short and I went home to bed, but my then girlfriend, Polly, woke me shouting. I saw a ruddy-nosed man with blonde curly hair by the door to the room, and I thought he was a burglar. I threw the bedside lamp at him. My girlfriend was not impressed. She woke me to say that our cat was vomiting on the duvet. It seemed more likely that it was a carryover from a dream. The figure was definitely situated by the door and seemed solid and real, but I assume that the ghost hunt simply acted as psychological priming. Now, although it wasn't a personal experience of contagion, CJ also mentioned an event that he was involved in. In 1992, a group of students experimenting with ritual magic painted emerald green sigils on a 2p coin and performed a golden dawn rite to make a love talisman dedicated to Venus. Very strange phenomena then seemed to occur around anyone in possession of the item. They included a car battery draining, light bulbs shattering when rooms were entered, a beer bottle exploding, a weird encounter with two men in black type figures on a train, and various minor haunting type manifestations. Those not directly involved in the ritual, but who lived with them, several households, seemed to experience the phenomena as well, some not knowing anything about the experiment. The sequence of events ended after the item was ritually disposed of in the foundations of a new building. Finally, June Matlock, that's a pseudonym, believed that she had experienced contagion on a few occasions. I arranged a telephone interview with her permission to record the call, but for some reason, probably not paranormal, my digital voice recorder failed to record it. I think that was probably technical incompetence on my part rather than anything mysterious. Matlock said that she would get back to me with some written notes about her experiences, but I didn't receive any. Therefore, I shall confine myself to mentioning very briefly just one of the instances that she described. It occurred one evening when she was driving home alone from an investigation. She saw an apparition of a woman in her car. If I recall correctly what she told me, she believed that the figure was related to the case that she'd just been investigating. Next slide, please, CJ. So, coming towards the end, these are speculations. They're not based on sort of really hard data. First of all, I would speculate that people differ in their immunity to paranormal contagion. I suspect that contagion is more likely if the case under investigation is active. Going back to the South Shield poltergeist case, it was a very active case in the sense that quite intense phenomena were occurring, and contagion occurred. I think if you go to the King's Head for a sort of a ghost vigil, as it were, and it's one of these places where you get an appearance of the Green Lady occurring once every 20 years, I suspect you're much less likely to come home with something following you and causing disturbances. If you witness phenomena at the investigation site, I suspect you're more likely to experience contagion than if you don't, particularly if you scare easily. And I'll maybe come back to the scaring easily bit in a moment. And investigators who may be more likely to experience contagion may be more likely to experience contagion than people who visit active sites for non-investigative reasons. I'm thinking here of, let's say you're living next door to someone, you've no interest in the paranormal, they're having, unbeknown to you, they're experiencing paranormal phenomena, and you knock on their door one day and asking if they could give you a bit of sugar because you've run out. Now, if your visit is for something like that, I suspect you're probably less likely to attract contagion than if you're an investigator. And this may be related to the fact that, as I say, if there's an intelligence behind contagion phenomena, the contagion phenomena may be aimed at punishing or deterring investigation. Mind your own business, F off, that kind of sentiment, which wouldn't apply so much to the woman or the man wanting some sugar from the neighbor. This matter of scaring easily, Darren Ritson, in his book, he raises this question of whether poltergeist and by extension, I think we could say other paranormal phenomena, feed on fear. A regular feature, of course, of paranormal phenomena, particularly poltergeist and disturbing phenomena of that nature, is that they do evoke anxiety and fear in people. The notion of feeding on fear is an odd one to me because fear isn't a substance or energy, it's a mental or physiological state. Nevertheless, this feeding on fear notion does make sense in the sense that if the entity or the intelligence is feeding on fear, the fear generated by its activities may enable the phenomena to continue and for the entity or to even exist. Therefore, if you are someone who does scare easily, and you're a site, and if that entity is inclined to try and feed on your fear, it's more likely to target you if you scare easily than if you're kind of rather laid back about the whole thing. So that's just a speculation. I'm thinking again here of Juliet Witt in the case of the Skinwalker Ranch. She was obviously disturbed by her sighting of the dinosaur type creature, and wanted someone to sleep, you know, in the room adjacent to her, or she wanted someone in the room adjacent to her when she was trying to sleep for her security. Therefore, that does sort of tend to point that direction. However, before I can generalize it with any reliability, I'd have to see a lot more case examples. Well, I think I've probably run up. I've come to the end now, and if there is time, I'll just open for questions if that's okay.
Peter, thank you very much for your talk.